Okay, so I'm going to get started. My topic today is PhORCAS, the match, and the post-match process for residency applicants. My name is Hailey Soni. I'm one of the internal medicine pharmacists and the coordinator for internal medicine pharmacy at University of Chicago Medicine. I'm also one of the coordinators for our PGY1 residency program, which is why this topic is near and dear to my heart. All right, so to start off with, what are PhORCAS and the match? These terms are thrown around a lot in the residency application process, and I think it's important to really have a good understanding of what we're starting with. They're very familiar to the preceptor side and the residency program director side because we work with these year in and year out, but as you're a new student ready to start applying to residency programs, these can be pretty foreign topics. So PhORCAS is the Pharmacy Online Residency Centralized Application Service, which basically just means it's a way that you can apply for multiple residency programs through an online portal. And then the second, the match, is run by the ASHP matching program, and it's administered by the National Matching Service. These are two separate but complementary services for residency applicants, and so you need to make sure that you are registered and signed up for both systems in order to successfully apply to residency programs that use the match system. All right, so I'm going to go over some components of a successful application and what it really means to be a high-quality residency applicant. So first thing is your updated CV. This is typically the first time that some of you will ever be putting together a CV. So I do recommend using your school's guidance or previous people who have applied to residency programs to get some advice, and having someone, also a mentor or another pharmacy student or a faculty member, to review your CV, because you want to make sure this is kind of the bread and butter of the application, and you want to make sure that your CV looks great and contains all of the correct information. The second thing is your letter of intent. So you must write a specific letter of intent for each program you plan to apply to. And this really kind of outlines, your own goals for obtaining a residency, how they'll contribute to your future career, and then also how what that program has to offer aligns with your goals and how you'd be a good fit for their program. The third thing is your letters of recommendation. So there's two ways to set up letters of recommendation in the PhORCAS system. The first one is you can have your letter writers write a specific letter of recommendation for each program you apply to, or you can have them fill out a general letter of recommendation that will then be sent out to all of the programs that you apply to. From the letter writer perspective, as someone who's written many letters of recommendation every single year, I will say I don't have a preference of which way the candidate sets up their letter of recommendation, because the way that the PhORCAS system works is there's actually a standardized form that can be used for each program, and then there's just a small section that can be customized to each individual program. And so a lot of the fields can be carried over from one letter to the next, even if you set it up to be program specific, and then the writer can just edit some of those comments to make it very specific to the program that you're applying to. So either way, I don't have a preference. Some letter writers may have a preference, or you may have a preference, and so that's something you'll need to work out amongst yourself and the letter writers that you select. The next thing is your PhORCAS application. This is a collection of, general information about you. It includes your address and your phone number and a lot of just basic contact information, as well as it'll include a lot of the same things that are asked about on your CV. So what I would recommend is that you try as best as you can to make sure that what you put in your PhORCAS application also is mirrored in what is offered in your CV. If there's discrepancies or things that I see on your CV that I didn't see in your application, or on your application that I didn't see in your CV, I'm kind of starting to question what the relevance of that activity was, whether it was a project or a committee that you were involved in. And so try to make sure you have mostly the same information included in both of those areas. The next thing is your official transcript, which you'll need to work with your School of Pharmacy on submitting, because it has to be submitted on their end. and then any supplemental requirements for the program. So all programs will outline what their specific requirements. The top 5 things I just went over are typically requirements of every single program, and then other programs may need you to write a supplemental essay or answer a couple of questions, or provide additional information about yourself to really get a better idea of who you are as a candidate. And so make sure you're not skipping any of that supplemental requirements for each program. And then lastly, you'll need to make sure that you submit the application fees to PhORCAS, which I'll go over in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to go over in a series of slides some of the tips that I have for submitting a successful application, because as you can imagine, each program receives many applications, and what you want to make sure you do is have a solid application that's going to highlight all of your qualities and why you would be a good fit for the residency program. Okay, so number 1 is register for the match in order to be able to participate in the application process. This registration is one of the first things that happens in a couple of months, and so that's like how you kind of get yourself on the grid. And then the second thing is you want to submit your applications through the PhORCAS system. There are a number of programs that are exempt from the system, including Indian Health Services and other international programs. So do make sure you understand the requirements of the specific programs that you're interested in applying to. You may still need to register for the PhORCAS system if you're applying to a bunch of different programs, but if one of those is an IHS residency, then that one would be like external to the PhORCAS system. You do need to, as I mentioned before, submit the appropriate fees. So there's a one-time fee for registering for the match, and then for PhORCAS, you pay per application. So there's a one-time like lump sum that includes the first 4 applications you're going to send out, and then for each application thereafter, there'll be an additional fee. So do keep in mind, you want to be somewhat selective in the number of places you're applying to, because you don't want to be paying an astronomical fee to send out all of these applications. But you also do want to consider, sending applications to all of your top choices, because as you know, the residency process can be very competitive, and so you want to make sure you're kind of putting yourself out there to enough programs where you'll have a good chance of landing some interviews and a position. All right, so in terms of submitting, so on the applicant side, you actually, there's a number of different things that you control, right, with your application, and a number of different things that are outside of your control. So 2 of the things that are outside of your control are your transcripts and your letters of recommendation. So in terms of your e-submission of the application, you don't need to wait until your school sends your transcript or all of your letters of recommendation are submitted before you can e-submit your applications. You do have to designate, which school you're waiting for the transcript from and who the letter writers are, but you don't need to wait for their end in order to get all of your materials in. So my suggestion would be, once you have your materials ready and finalized, you do go ahead and submit those. On the program side, they'll be then able to start reviewing your application materials and can review those letters and transcripts as they kind of filter in from the various outside sources. Secondly, you don't need to e-submit your applications to all programs at the same time. You can submit them one by one as soon as you complete all the program requirements. You do need to be careful though, because once you e-submit, some of the fields will lock and you'll no longer be able to edit them. Some of the fields that you definitely can go back and edit is generally your personal or contact information if needed. And I would highly recommend that the phone number and address that you include in your application is somewhere that you can definitely be reached. Typically, programs are reaching out to either phone numbers or email addresses as soon as they're ready to offer interviews. And so you want to make sure that that phone number is somewhere where you can be reached, because if you give a phone number that doesn't work, or a phone number that you're no longer going to be using anymore come January, then how will that program get a hold of you when they're ready to offer you an interview? So just keep that in mind. And those things, like I said, you can edit after the fact if there is a change in your information. All right, so some things that I see as common mistakes is you want to make sure all of your letters of intent are addressed and written to the correct program and RPD. I can't tell you how many times at University of Chicago I've received letters for University of Illinois at Chicago, and I know it's a very common mistake, but you know, it does reflect poorly on the applicant if you don't even get the name of the RPD or the program correct for the application that you're submitting. So please do double check and make sure each of those are correct before you submit your application. The second thing I would recommend is that you reach out to the people that you want to write your letters of recommendation well in advance. These are not something that you want to give someone a week turnaround or a very quick time. People take a lot of time and thought and effort put into writing quality letters of recommendation. And so you want to make sure that you've given the person enough time to really think and reflect on what they want to write about in advance of when the deadlines are coming up. When asking an individual to write you a letter of recommendation, I usually recommend, if you're asking a preceptor, to try to ask them on the last day of your rotation, and that's a nice way to do it because you can have that face-to-face conversation with them. You're not like emailing them after the fact, and you can really get a good sense of if that preceptor would be able to write you a strong letter of support. And when you're asking anyone to write you a letter of recommendation, what you want to make sure is that they're going to be able to write you a strong letter in support of your application. As I mentioned, I think, you know, it's important that you have enough letters, but it's also important that these people are going to be able to provide you quality letters. What you don't want is for someone who you have a somewhat tenuous relationship with to write you a letter because you don't know, you won't be able to know what they're writing and if it's actually going to be a positive addition to your application or maybe a kind of so-so addition. And so what you want is people who have worked with you in a positive capacity that can write you a strong letter. Some programs do have specific requirements that they would like for you to follow in terms of who you select. Like they may say you need one clinical preceptor, you need one employer, and you need one faculty member from your school of pharmacy. Other programs do not include any guidance for who writes the letters. For programs who don't provide any guidance, I would still try to pick a variety of letter writers who you've worked with in different capacities. That way they'll be able to comment on different skill sets that you might have demonstrated. Whereas if you pick the same, like if you pick 3 people who you've had as employers, they might be able to comment on only the fact that you showed up on time and you were able to complete your work efficiently, and they won't be able to comment at all on your clinical skills. So you want to have kind of some variety so that you're really able to demonstrate that you have a breadth and depth of skills that you'll be able to bring to your residency program. I will caution you that some letter writers may ask you for more information before they agree to write the letter. So some of the things that I usually ask for candidates to provide for me is, why are you interested in doing a residency? Which programs are you applying to? What are the top qualities of that program that align with your goals? You know, different aspects like that, because I want to make sure that as I'm writing my letter, I'm being cohesive with the message that the candidate is sending in terms of what they're looking for and what they're interested in and how they may be a good fit for the programs they've selected to apply to. And so don't be surprised if you get asked for a little bit more information. And I think the more detailed and effort you put into providing that can be really helpful. All right, so lastly, in terms of the applications, know your deadlines. So residency programs are all able to pick their own respective deadlines for their applications. Typically, they'll be late December or early January, but I would say there's a very wide variety of deadlines for programs. So check the website materials for the programs, the promotional stuff, and the ASHP residency directory site also has this information. And I would say do not wait until the last minute to submit. As you'll notice, the end of December and early January are right around the holiday season. And so what you don't want is for, you know, things to kind of get lost in the winter break and holiday shuffle, and then you end up missing a deadline. So do be really aware of when those deadlines are going to fall. And also make sure your letter of recommendation writers are aware of when those deadlines fall, because you'll want to make sure they meet them as well. I would say watch out for programs that may be in different time zones, especially if you're applying to programs on the East Coast. That can be particularly problematic because their deadlines would actually fall, if it's midnight on the date, it would actually be 11 p.m. here. So you want to make sure you get your application in time. I know some people like to wait till the last minute, even though it's not recommended. And then lastly, one piece of advice that I've learned over the years is because it is all online based, there are sometimes glitches with the PhORCAS system or the website, whether it's on the program end or on the application end. And so what you want to try to do is submit your application on a weekday in advance of the deadline. And that way the PhORCAS team is generally very available and super willing to help out if there are technical issues. But if you do find yourself submitting on a weekend or on an off hour in the middle of the night, that team is not going to be as available to you or may not be available at all to help you out. And so then you might find that you've missed the deadline just because of a technical glitch, which, you know, on the program end, if you miss the deadline, you miss the deadline, and sometimes they're unwilling to compromise or work with that. It's really on the candidate side to make sure you're prepared and on time. So just keep that in mind. A weekday during the daytime hours is usually the best times to submit. All right, so in terms of the timeline, I do apologize because I had to estimate the timeline based on the timeline last year, but I did read on the website that for the match that the actual dates will be on the website available in August. So I would check that website. It probably is available now, but it wasn't at the time I put my slides together. So, but these are estimations and they generally line up year after year very close. So the first thing in the timeline is you'll receive a list of the programs that are participating in the match in early November. It's usually November 1st, and so that's the first time you'll be able to see all of the programs available through the match system. This generally mirrors what you'll see in the ASHP directory, with the exception of programs that don't participate in the match. Then a couple of days later, usually still within the first week of November, registration for the match will open. If you definitely know you're going to be applying for residency programs, go ahead and register for this right away, because you can register for it, you know, up until later, but like why wait if you know that this is something you're going to participate in. And then the next step will be to start submitting your applications based on those program specific deadlines. And like I mentioned, typically applications are due at the end of December or early January. And usually if you're someone who wants to participate in the ASHP Residency Showcase to learn a little bit more about each of the programs, usually people will start submitting applications sometime after the mid-year and then obviously before the deadlines. Okay, so the next thing is programs will reach out to schedule interviews. Typically interviews last anywhere from mid-January through the end of February. So depending on how many interviews you get, this can be a really busy time in a student's career. If you've got rotation going on and you have a lot of applications, I know this year with all of the distance learning, we may be looking at distance interviewing in a lot of different cases. So you might not need to travel, but do keep in mind the time commitment that might be necessary as you're preparing for interviews at a lot of different programs. The next thing is after you're done with all of your interviews is to really review the list of programs where you went and think about the pros and cons for each program. You should be able to wrap up this process by the end of February or early March. And this is really you understanding what list you're going to submit for the match. And then you'll have to look at when the match deadline is. I believe it's the first week of March this year. And you'll end up being able to rank all of the programs within the PhORCAS system by the deadline. And then from there, the results from phase 1 of the match will be released mid-March. It usually takes about 2 weeks. So I would expect mid-March is when you'll have those first results back. Okay, so phase 2. Phase 2 can get a little more murky in terms of the timeline because it's very much condensed. So for phase 1, we were talking like November through March, and now we're talking a series of like less than a month. So following the release of the first phase results, A list of unmatched programs will be released to anybody who participated in phase 1 of the match and didn't end up matching. So do keep in mind, this is going to include all types of programs. It's going to include PGY2s, it's going to, a slew of all those different specialties, as well as all of the PGY1 unmatched programs. And so what you want to do is I would start by filtering the list to target the specific type of program that you're looking at. Otherwise, this list is really lengthy and can get kind of overwhelming. So applicants in phase 2 cannot submit applications immediately. Usually there's a few day lag where they expect people to be reviewing the list and getting their applications prepared. However, I would say if you don't match in phase 1, my recommendation would be to start preparing your application immediately. So you found out that you didn't match. Start reviewing that list of unmatched programs immediately if you want to move forward with pursuing a residency, and then start to update your application. If there's any changes that have happened since you submitted those first round of applications in late December, you may want to add that information in and get ready for submissions. Applicants and programs can start to submit their rank list usually within 1 to 2 weeks. So what that means is all final list. So you have to apply and interview and get all of that stuff done within 1 to 2 weeks. So it's a very quick turnaround before you have to submit your final rank list for phase 2, and the results then come out within about a week after that. After this, unmatched candidates will again receive a list of unmatched programs to see if they can identify if there's any openings that apply to them or submit any applications. There are no more rounds of the match though. You would then just work with the programs individually to try to secure a residency spot. So like I mentioned, my main tip for phase 2 is to update your CV and application as soon as possible. This is not like phase 1 where you can wait to submit until the deadline. A lot of times programs with unfilled positions will start to review applications as soon as they're received and start kind of a rolling process for offering interviews. And so what you want to do is get your application updated and out to the programs as soon as possible so they can start to review your materials and see if they want to bring you on for an interview or do a virtual type of interview. I would always recommend that if you're reviewing the list of programs, try reaching out to mentors or people in your network, people who you know might know someone at the programs with an open spot, or even reaching out directly to programs that you're very interested in applying to if you feel comfortable with that. What is helpful on a program side is to see that someone's truly interested and wants to take initiative to contact you or somehow make their application stand out. And so sometimes if you do have that contact or someone who can help do that on your behalf, that can be really helpful. It also can be helpful because a mentor may be able to provide you some insight on unmatched programs. So which ones align well with your interests or which ones might be a good fit for you. There is no additional match fee for phase 2, but you do still need to pay for all of the programs that you apply to. So just keep in mind, if you're going to shoot off like 40 applications, that might get a little bit costly. So you still want to make sure you're only applying to programs that you truly would be interested in attending residency there. Letters of recommendation may need to be updated. If you did have your letter writer write a specific program-specific letters, they may need to update those because obviously those programs would change that you're applying to. And then your letter of intent, if they do ask for that with the application materials, would obviously need to be updated and customized to the new programs that you're applying to. Interview types will vary based on the institution's preference, but many will do abbreviated interviews. They may cut a full day interview or a half day interview down into, a 30-minute or 2-hour interview. And typically these are done over the phone or on video, just because when you only have 1 to 2 weeks, it's really hard to set up travel. Especially right now, I would imagine that most people are going to do phone or video interviews to avoid travel during this time period where we have so many other restrictions on social engagements. And then lastly, I just kind of wanted to offer some words of advice on if you are someone who finds yourself in the position of being in the phase 2 of the match or even beyond that and you haven't secured a residency position. For years, many years, at least all of the ones that I've been working with residency programs, the demand for residency positions has exceeded the supply. So I looked back at the 2019 data, and only 63% of applicants were accepted into PGY1 programs, which means that the remaining candidates all did not secure residency positions. Failing to match in phase 1 does not mean that you are not a smart applicant, not a talented enough applicant, but rather that the supply of residency positions has failed to keep up with the demand, or possibly that you didn't initially apply to the programs that would be the best fit for you. And that's why it didn't work out. And so it does not mean by any means that you're a poor applicant or that you should give up. I definitely want to send a message of encouragement that not everyone follows the straight and narrow path that they set out to, and that doesn't mean that you're a bad candidate or you'll be a bad pharmacist. But it just means you're going to go down a different path, and that's okay. Some ways to handle not matching in the phase 1 of the match are, like I mentioned before, prepare immediately for phase 2 of the match if that's something that you're planning to pursue. Reach out to your support system, whether it's fellow students, faculty members you know, work with and trust, your family members. Reach out to someone, so you're not experiencing this all on your own, and you can lean back on that support system to help you get through this time. Don't dwell on this event. Everyone is going to have a career path. And like I mentioned, even if you're not on the same narrow path that you thought you started out on, that's okay. And you'll find your own path to a successful career. So don't dwell on this. Just start to plan for the future and plan for what your next steps are given the circumstances. And the last thing I'll say is, if you end up after the end of the match in phase 2 and beyond, and you still haven't landed a residency position, that does not mean that the residency track is over for you. Consider other career options that might help you develop skills, other certificates, other types of training that will make you an even better candidate for the future. A lot of programs do offer non-traditional residency programs that sometimes don't go through the match, but are options for people who don't participate in residencies straight out of school, or sometimes, there are people who apply to the residency match the following year and end up being great residency candidates. And so you don't have to be straight out of school in order to land a residency. And I just want to provide some words of encouragement that there are other paths, and you're definitely not a failure if you feel like you were rejected from the residency process through the first time you try. I really want to encourage everybody who's interested in residency to continue to pursue it as long as they're interested and willing to put in the hard work of, they say that each year of residency is equivalent to about 5 years of working. And residency programs are tough, but if you're willing to put in the work, you'll end up successful on the other end. So that is all I have in terms of slides and my presentation. So I hope that was helpful for you. And ICHP will be providing the Q&A session at the end, so we can make sure to answer any questions. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.